Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, ladies. I am back with a very long awaited second episode of Geeking Over God. I know it's been a minute, but I hope you enjoyed today's conversation because it is part two with, I think, one of your favorite guests. We are going to be talking about everything that is harmony of hearts, whereas you're navigating faith, boundaries, and friendship. In today's episode, we dive into the ebb and flow of faith, exploring the natural highs and lows experienced by individuals across their spiritual journeys, as shared by our guest, Ghena from Deen and Chai. We share practical insights on overcoming feelings of disconnection through self-reflection, Tawbah, gratitude practices, and an enriching support of a community. Additionally, we navigate the challenges of finding meaningful friendships within the Muslim community as adults, because it gets hard sometimes, and the importance of establishing and maintaining healthy boundaries rooted in the Quranic teachings and Hadith. So get excited for our guests here today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ghena, how are you doing
Walaikum
today?
assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm doing good. Thank you for having me back.
Oh my God. Oh, thank you for coming. I'm super excited. I know everyone else might be excited. Y'all, Rena does not need an intro, but I will give it to you anyways. A quick recap. She's an engineer. She has the love for Deen. She also has her own YouTube channel, and all of her links will be down below. But her space she provides is an opportunity for Muslim women to casually talk about the importance of faith. So today we're actually going to be talking about several different things, as outlined in my introduction. I asked this to you last time to get started because this is how I start off all my episodes. And so I'll be curious to kind of see, I love asking different questions, especially over time because answers change. But currently, to open us up, what does loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mean to you?
Okay, you know what? I don't remember what I said last time. So I'm gonna go with what is coming to mind now, which it might be the same thing, I'm not sure. But I feel like loving Allah is basically doing the things that He loves. You know, when you love someone, you wanna please them, you wanna do things for them, you want to show up and all of that. So to me, it's the same, like with Allah, right? Loving Allah means you show up, right? You respond to Him and you do the things that He loves. So that's my answer today. I don't know what my answer was last time, but yeah.
No, subhanAllah, I love that because as you do more things that he loves, naturally you're pleasing him, and it's just a continuous cycle
Mhm.
of pleasing him and living your life in a way that pleases him and him only. And if you get
Mhm.
better at that, I don't know, you kind of start to taste the sweetness of his love, and
Yeah.
you remind yourself that he's always there to love you. And we're going to kind of perhaps talk about that, right?
Yeah.
How do we remove some of those feelings that we put on ourselves?
Hmm. Hmm.
Not Allah, but it's us sort of giving up when we shouldn't.
Yeah.
So speaking of, let's just jump into things because we have lots of exciting things to get through. So this first, category that I wanted us to start off with is, how do we overcome and push past disconnection? Because I want to normalize that happens, right? That sometimes happens, that your journey with Deen and love for Allah is a way, like you ride the waves up and down. And so especially as we look ahead to Ramadan coming up,
Hmm.
there's we want to get prepped mentally, but it's sometimes harder than it sounds. And so why don't we just kind of dive into things about how do we remedy this? And so what would you say is perhaps a solution, or the answer to how to deal with feeling disconnected from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Yeah, I think the word that you use, normalizing it, I think it's important to recognize that it does happen, right? It's normal to feel those ups and downs, and then it's just about what you do with it, right? And even if we look at just the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even he would make istighfar 100 times a day, right? And in a hadith, we have him saying that, uh, I'll read it out. Verily, at times there is fog over my heart, so I seek the forgiveness of Allah 100 times a day. And and this, from commentators, they say that it means that he had intervals of distraction or inattentiveness, or not fully being mindful of Allah. And he was the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And when you think of it like that, okay, he's our best example. And he had moments where he felt, hey, I feel something over my heart, or I feel I'm inattentive. And so he would make istighfar 100 times a day. And I think for us, that's a beautiful example and reminder that, look, even the Prophet ﷺ had these moments. Of course, we're going to have these moments too, right? But then what do we do with it? And he gave us a tool, for example, right? He told us, okay, I'm dealing with this, and this is what I do for it, right? I seek forgiveness 100 times a day. So I think it's important to recognize that it's normal. And then what do you do with it, right? And also it's a balance, right? Because you want to recognize that it's normal, but that doesn't mean it's a green light to just be complacent with where you're at, right? So it's kind of a balance. And you also don't want to take you don't want to beat yourself up about it, right? You don't want to be like, oh, I'm such in a low with my faith, and you start feeding yourself these messages that shaitan loves for you to feed yourself, right? Like, Allah's disappointed in me. There's no hope. There's no turning back for me. There's no point in me trying. I'm so far away. And then you slip and slip and slip further away, right? You don't want to be there either. That's a dangerous place to be too. So it's kind of a balance of recognizing that it's okay and then taking those steps to try to figure out, okay, how do I remedy that? And one of the ways is what the Prophet ﷺ gave us, right? Istighfar. And yeah, so
Yeah.
those are the initial
No,
thoughts. Yeah.
I love that we're talking about like normalizing that because it's my next question here is naturally like how common is this feeling, right? We're not alone in feeling
Uh-huh.
this, and specifically, I want to kind of touch upon like why is it important to address sooner than later?
Yeah, exactly as you said, because basically addressing it, recognizing it, right? And taking those steps, inshallah, you can remedy it quicker, right? And prevent yourself from just getting further and further and further away and feeling like you're in a state of, okay, I have a whole hill to climb now to get back to where I was, right? So recognizing it, having moments of self-reflection where, you are continuously reflecting on yourself, seeing where you're at, and so on. So you can kind of remedy that as it happens. And as you said, Ramadan is coming up, right? And even within Ramadan, I mean, I don't think any of us can say that every day of Ramadan looks the same to us, right? There's going to be that one day where it's so easy to read one juz, right, of Quran in that one day. Then there's going to be that second day where you're like struggling to read a page, right? I mean, even within that, you're going to see fluctuations, inshallah. But inshallah, you try to day by day, try to remedy it, try to overcome it, recognize it, right? Okay, this day I only read one page, for example. My goal was, I don't know, 5 pages. Let me try to make it up a little bit the next day, and so on. You keep striving and you keep trying, and you motivate yourself to keep going, right? And not give up, inshallah.
That makes a lot of sense. I also love to kind of think about what the Quran kind of tells us in addressing that feeling because it's there. You just kind of have
Mhm.
to look for it and recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to you. And so I'd love to hear maybe your take on this ayat in Surah Al-Zumar, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically, telling the prophet to say, the prophet peace be upon him, to say that do not lose hope, pretty much. Like don't lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, that he's all forgiving and the most merciful. So when we hear things like that, right, in the Quran that is addressing, all of us, how does that contribute to our understanding of such fluctuations of those highs and lows, and how can we put that into perspective?
Yeah, I think so. This is a really beautiful verse to connect this to, and I think it's really important to get to know Allah and understand Allah, right? Because the more you understand Allah, the more you will recognize His absolute mercy for you and His absolute love for you that is just like no other, right? That He wants to embrace you in love and mercy and forgiveness and all of that. And the more you understand that, the more you get to know it through learning like the Quran verses that are like this one and so on, it kind of gives you a cushion to not fall into a place where you tell yourself, I'm outside of Allah's mercy. There's no hope for me, right? And I think it's important to draw these lessons and to get to know Allah, right? Because sometimes we set goals, for example, in Ramadan, right? We might set a goal that, okay, I want to read 5 pages a day. And okay, I'm reading the 5 pages a day, but I haven't fully connected to Allah or connected to the verses in a way that actually brought an additional meaning or an additional cushion kind of to my life, right? So I think it's important to also be learning, right? Not only setting goals where it's a checkbox, right? Okay, I prayed 5 times a day. I read this much of Quran in a day, and I'm good, right? We want to be learning our faith, right? Gaining knowledge, understanding more who Allah is, understanding stories of the prophets, understanding stories of the companions. And subhanAllah, there's so many beautiful stories because really, if you look at from the prophets, from the companions, and so on, you will see stories of procrastination, right? You'll see stories of different hardships. You'll see stories of falling into sin. You will see stories of, I mean, you'll see all kinds of stories, and it will help you not feel alone and not feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so bad. These people that were around the Prophet, ﷺ, they even dealt with those things, and they had him in front of them, right? You would think, because sometimes we tell ourselves, oh, it's harder because if I had the Prophet ﷺ in front of me, I would be amazing, right? That would be my motivation. That would be, I don't know what. But at the end of the day, you're human. And when you look at the stories of the companions, you see all those same issues that you're dealing with, you'll find them in those stories. So yeah, I think it's important to also be learning at the same time, inshallah, and that gives you a cushion, kind of a motivational cushion that you fall back on, right? When you have these moments where you're kind of dipping, and then you draw strength from those stories, from understanding Allah, and from not feeding yourself messages like, there's no hope and Allah's disappointed in me and I'm outside of his mercy and all of that kind of
Yeah.
talk. Yeah.
Yeah, it's subhanAllah. I think about a recent lecture that I attended with Ustad Hassan Adwan, who
Mm.
literally talks about this reflection of his series that I was attending was called When the Righteous Slip Up. And
Mhm.
that his, you know, takeaway was that subhanAllah, the Quran, first and foremost, and of course we have stories of the companions, like you said, but the Quran itself doesn't just show examples of perfection.
Exactly.
It doesn't do that, and it talks about these instances where obviously the prophets, they're perfect in themselves, but even their slip ups that to them is nothing, right? Because
Yeah.
they're the prophets, but even just normal humans with the archers of Ahad.
Yeah.
That's one of
Yeah,
the
exactly.
examples that
Hmm.
um, Asad Hassan brings up is Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala forgave them. Like in the
Hmm.
Quran, oftentimes it's repeated to the archers that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has forgiven them. And
Hmm.
for them, to be forgiven in that sort of gravity of a mistake or
Hmm.
disobedience, we shouldn't lose hope in
Exactly.
Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala's mercy. It's us giving up, not him, not Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala giving up on us. So
Yeah, and when you think of it actually also, is that, you would think that, okay, the companions, you would hold them to a higher standard, right? Because they're like with the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you are expecting so much from them. But you see how Allah was so forgiving of them and so merciful to them. So that should also be a form of comfort that, okay, like even these people of this high status, they slipped up and they were forgiven. Allah had mercy for them. So of course Allah has mercy for me too. I fall under that umbrella. And inshallah, it's kind of again, encouragement, motivation for us, inshallah, when we learn about these stories.
yeah, because it's always a constant journey of learning. Because the more you
Hmm.
know, um, the more you know. Like
Hmm.
the more
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
understandings of what Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is, who He is, how much He loves us, and you're not going to want to fall into a state of despair, or perhaps when you do, it's easier. It's just much
Yeah.
easier to like just bounce back and come
Yeah.
back, inshallah.
Yeah.
So
Inshallah.
speaking of, I think a lot of what we're talking about here is there needs to be some sort of like self-awareness that you have for with your
Yeah.
own relationship with Allah and your own relationship with the Deen at different parts of your life, because without you having that self-reflection or self-awareness as to where you're at, how do you know if you need to remedy it, right? So
Exactly.
what does the role of self-reflection and introspection play in reconnecting with one's Deen?
Yeah, I think self-reflection is really important.
Mm.
The more you understand and you're able to evaluate yourself and your shortcomings and so on, the more you can adapt, right? And try to make those changes. And and part of self-reflection is recognizing where you fall short, right? Being able to recognize those shortcomings that you have. It's going to look different, of course, for each one of us, right? We're all going to evaluate ourselves differently, have different shortcomings that we recognize and so on. But it's important to look and reflect on those things and recognize, things like, for example, where is our time going? What good deeds am I participating in? What do my prayers look like right now, right? And just evaluating all those different things in our life and seeing where we are at, and then being completely honest with ourselves, right? And recognizing those shortcomings, and then not just recognizing them, but then the next step is to actually make those changes, right? And to decide how can we adapt? How can we take those little steps to move out of that, to do a little bit better, to strive a bit more, and to take action. And I think also one other important point is not compare yourself with someone else, right? You're on your own journey. Don't compare yourself to someone else. And also, something that might work for someone else might not work for you, right? You might find a connection with Allah some other way compared to someone else. And that might kind of reignite the flame of faith in you, right? Whereas maybe for someone else it doesn't work at all, but something else works for them that doesn't work for you, right? So it's important to recognize, try to take actions, be okay with trial and error, seeing, something might not work for you. Try something else. Don't give up, right? Oh, this worked for somebody, it didn't work for me. There's no hope in me. Again, don't feed yourself those messages. Just recognize you're your own person, you're your own journey, and to trial and error and see what works for you, inshallah. I also heard this one thing in a lecture of this teacher was saying that one way to evaluate your day is to just spend a day in istighfar and just spend your whole day saying astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. And it makes you more mindful of every action you're taking. And that way, throughout the day, you can be evaluating, because things that feel wrong while you're saying astaghfirullah, you'll be like, oh, okay, so much of my time is going to this thing. It doesn't feel right. You're more conscious of what you're doing and how you're spending your time. So she was saying, like, just spend 24 hours of your day just doing that. And it puts you in a state of self-reflection because you're recognizing every moment and how you're spending your day. And I thought that was an interesting way to do things. You get the benefit of istighfar, but you also get the benefit of being conscious of your day, right? And recognizing where your time is going.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's a very real sort of applicable thing that we can do in
Hmm.
our day to day to sort of evaluate where we're at in terms of our routine and what perhaps might need to change in that routine so that we can sort of be heightened on how it's impacting our relationship with
Yeah,
Allah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's another thing that I just remember that I heard also someone say is that to also spend a day literally writing as if you were the angels writing down your tasks, you know? And you write it down with that mindset and see what are you proud to have written down and what doesn't feel right. And that gives me goosebumps thinking about it. Like, yeah. So that was another tip that I remember someone saying. Yeah.
Wow, I can't even, like having that quite lit
Yeah.
physical, like, oh my God,
Uh-huh.
that's subhanAllah. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that because that is so real. Like that can sort
Yeah.
of kind of wake you up if
Exactly.
people, you sometimes you need it. I've needed it before,
Yeah.
and you just need that wake up call as to the day to day, the second by second playbook
Yeah.
of your
Exactly.
life of your
Yeah.
day, so that you can sort of work on adjusting things that need to be sort of taken care of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Subhanallah. I mean, you mentioned the practice of istighfar, so I'd love to
Mhm.
pivot, perhaps, like, take that next step of
Yeah.
what does the practice of Tawbah look like? The actual, intentional component of completely turning to Allah and being in a state of repentance. How can that be a means of healing and restoration with whatever you might get up to? But what does that look like in terms of perhaps being a remedy and a means of healing?
Yeah, I think the concept of Tawbah in Islam, I think, is so beautiful because it just gives you a means to just turn a new chapter in your life, right? To turn, kind of clean your act up, start from scratch and try to reset things. And it's easy also to do, right? Allah gives us direct access to him to do it. Like we don't need to go through an intercessor and like talk to someone and have them intercede for us and like, forgive us, on their behalf or anything. Like you have direct access to Allah. You can turn the page. It's easy to do. It's a beautiful private moment that you have with Allah. You're sharing it with Allah. And yeah, you pretty much, it's like you get a second chance, right? You get a second chance. And the thing is, Allah wants to forgive. And again, the more you know Him, the more you'll understand that He wants to forgive. Our introduction to the first of creation, Adam alayhi salam, was literally an introduction to Allah's forgiveness, right? He showed us through the story how forgiving He is. Adam alayhi salam, the first person, there was a slip up, right? And He showed us how He wanted to forgive. And subhanAllah, you see in the Quran, At-Tawwab and Ar-Rahim paired together. Like He is the Tawwab, He's the one that is forgiving and forgiving. And it's even the way it's phrased, it's just forgiveness upon forgiveness. And it's paired with Ar-Rahim. Why does He want to forgive? He has so much mercy for you, right? Rahim, Rahma, mercy. That's what He is, right? He's merciful, and He pairs the two together so beautifully as a reminder that He's full of mercy for you. So He wants to forgive you. And yeah, it's subhanAllah, it's just a beautiful gift that we are given that is so easy to take advantage of, inshallah. So yeah, take advantage of it. And again, the same thing, like don't ever tell yourself that you're outside His rahmah or His mercy, right? You're within it. You're under it.
I
Yeah.
know. I love it. I love that you also like say it's a gift, and it truly is.
Yeah.
And sometimes that gift is taken advantage of
Hmm.
by neglection or just you thinking you don't need it, right? That
Yeah.
you're far past this idea
Yeah.
of turning back and repenting, and also that's not a state to be in. That
Hmm.
almost even further than feeling disconnected, but perhaps entering a state of arrogance, which is
Exactly.
super,
Yeah.
red line to sort of cross over as it's mentioned in the Quran. Like you should avoid being arrogant. Um, Another component that I wanted to kind of bring up in the still like addressing the idea of remedying disconnection.
Mhm.
Let's kind of pivot to perhaps like shukr, like gratitude, being in a state
Yeah.
of gratitude as a practice to be able to also combat those feelings of disconnection. So, what does that impact look like in fostering a stronger connection with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala?
Yeah, subhanAllah, the more you're grateful to Allah, the easier you're going to find it is to connect to Him and build on that foundation, right? And if you think of it in terms of a person, right? If you're grateful to someone, you want to show up for them, right? You want to respond to their call. You have love for them, right? You appreciate them, you want to spend time with them. And subhanAllah, it's the same thing with Allah, right? If you're grateful to Allah, then it's much easier to feel in your heart that I want to respond to His call. I want to respond to the 5 prayers a day because I feel in my heart that I'm grateful, right? And subhanAllah, I think that's one beautiful way to work on our connections with Allah is to get to a place where we are feeling that gratitude towards Him because it makes a lot of things easier, right? If we have that gratitude. If we don't feel gratitude towards Him, it kind of hardens your heart, right? You don't feel gratitude. You don't feel then that you need Him. You don't feel that there's a point. You don't feel like you need to grow that connection or you kind of get hardened. I think that's a beautiful way to kind of build your relationship with Allah is to find that gratitude. And again, it's going to look different for everyone, right? Some people it might help them to, okay, every morning sit down and write like a few things that you're grateful for, right? Others, it might be doing something else, like going and volunteering and helping others who are less fortunate, right? You might then start to realize, wow, you're really grateful for the things that you have, right? And it could be a combination, of course, of those 2 things, 3 things, 4 things. But it's important to work on that, inshallah, and you will see the difference, inshallah, in how you respond to Allah and how you feel about your faith, contentment, your feelings of, gratitude. Yeah.
And there's so many ways that you can kind of implement and start practicing like gratitude in your day to day after Salah. Like, I think everyone should sort of sit down and kind of think about what their gratefulness of the, what is they, like, how are they in a state of gratefulness or gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because sometimes that is often like overlooked. And in the Quran it mentions like all of our blessings and all of the rahman, the mercy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is providing us, and yet humans, nature is to be ungrateful. And so we always have to be combating even that, making sure we're at the forefront of being thankful. The story of the fact that, like, just even our eye, the amount of blessings and, subhanallah, that like comes with just having health and all of these things. Like, we have to always be in a state of gratitude, because even turning to him is his mercy, right? Us being able to turn back to him and being grateful for him is a form of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. So we're always in this give back, because, even though we might never be able to be fully grateful, it's a really good practice to sort of have to be able to always foster a sense of connection with Allah. And yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Alhamdulillah. SubhanAllah, I know that five before five, the hadith I think you're referencing, has been, and I've had so many actually SubhanAllah conversations about it. It's super timely. I've been reflecting a lot on that, because, you know, I've had certain things in my life become just day to day has become so much more busy. I've lost a sense of feeling like I have free time, and I started to reflect on just even a few months ago where I had more free time, and I'm like, that the whole idea, the premise is like take advantage of it, right? Like, I asked myself, like, what did I do in my free time?
Yeah.
And I think about it now, when I do have moments of free time, I really try to take advantage, like,
Yeah.
meet my goals of recitation, or even spend time with my family, like all of these different things, instead of perhaps scrolling or watching something,
Exactly.
and things like that. So,
Yeah.
subhanAllah, I love that component of reflecting on, you never know when you're going to have moments to share and to spend for the
Mhm.
sake of Allah. So always have that as a top of mind. This
Yeah.
last question that I have here is, I kind of still buckets into this category of remedying feelings of disconnection. This last one is about community. Like, what role does community, because perhaps this is going to segue into our next bucket
Mhm.
of the conversation today, but what ways does community perhaps either your supporting environment, but also being involved in the community? Maybe you can have different reflections on either or, but generally, how does a presence of community, or one's involvement in community, help contribute to overcoming these feelings of disconnection?
Yeah, I think subhanAllah, Islam teaches us a lot about community, brotherhood, sisterhood, right? And we see the different ways it's supposed to be there for each other, help each other. We pray together, for example. These different aspects of community that I think are really beautiful, and subhanAllah, it's really helpful to our faith, because sometimes, there are moments where maybe you're feeling disconnected, but it's the community that brings you back, right? It's that friend that brings you back, or that space that you're in that brings you back, or you hear a little thing in a khutbah, like if you are attending a Friday prayer, or you're attending a different lecture or something, you hear something that maybe kind of just brings you a little bit back, right? So I think community, good community, right? Good community is really important, because it can really help us in those moments, especially in those moments when we are feeling low. It can really be a source of comfort and uplifting, and also the opposite way, right? Like if somebody else is feeling maybe low, their iman is fluctuating up and down, you might also be a source of uplifting for them, right? And sometimes you need that little nudge, just your friend saying, "Oh, it's prayer time. Let's go pray," right? Like those little things that, subhanAllah, keep you keep you motivated, keep you encouraged.
Yeah. And I like, the fact that you said good community
Yeah.
or like good environment because you are on the dean of your friends.
Yes, exactly.
And but as adults, and I'm going to segue into
Hmm.
our second sort of like bucket of our conversation here today about, you know, as you're adulting, I felt this as I have navigated early adulthood, post
Yeah.
grad life, about what does now finding Muslim friends and community look like for yourself, because it feels more like it takes a lot more effort,
Yeah.
naturally, when you're not just
Yeah.
given the environment,
Yeah.
either through like family upbringing, if you're in undergrad or grad space, like if you're in education, right?
Hmm.
Those, I feel like, oftentimes presents you with a sort of a community to at least like have, and then you can determine as to what sort of capacity you want to be involved in.
Yeah.
But when you're out of such spaces and you're sort of dealing with the day to day as adults, I'd love to kind of just like now talk about what does finding a supportive environment, what does finding good Muslim like girlfriends look like really as adults, because I think it's a huge talking point that is not as discussed, and it's like we're all sort of just navigating it alone, but I
Yeah.
feel like it can be a shared experience. So
Mhm.
from the bat, like what challenges do we face when we are trying to find these Muslim friends or community, in this
Yeah.
adulthood?
Yeah, I think as you said, it can be more challenging because it's you don't really know where to even begin, right? Where to go or how to have those conversation starters with people and so on. You're in a different space, right? When you're younger, if you're attending school, if you're attending college and so on, you're kind of forced to see people every day, right? You don't need to be calling people up to arrange to meet them because okay, at 9 a.m., you're seeing the same people every day in that class. At your 1 p.m. class, you're seeing the same people every day. You're kind of forced to have those connections, right? So you don't need to put in as much effort because it's already done for you, right? And you have something shared, right? Because you're attending the same class, you're having the same professor, you're attending the same school, maybe the degree you're pursuing is the same. You already have a bunch of shared things without you putting in the effort to find that person who shares those things, right? So it's much less effort in it. So yeah, it can and it's also you kind of need those day after day connections, right? To meet the person once, twice, three times, four times, and that happens naturally when you're taking a class or something, right? You're going to see them every day, every other day, whatever your schedule is like. But as an adult, you kind of need to seek those types of spaces which can be much more difficult to find,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Spaces where you're going to see people regularly, you're going to see
Mm-hmm.
the same people regularly, and slowly build those connections. And that can be a lot more challenging
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot less options maybe for spaces like that,
Yeah.
right? As an adult.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's like, I think different components of your life, you're looking at friendship differently, right?
Yeah.
Like you have different needs
Yeah.
at different moments in one's life, that friends kind of fulfill those needs at different
Mhm.
times and different reasons. But I think as we get older, and perhaps I've had my own journey where I've started to become more attuned to my deen, and so
Mhm.
naturally I have different needs than I had back in high school or even
Yeah.
middle school. And so what does that look like? How does that dynamic change? And when it comes to your own self looking and seeking for friendships, like how does that look different, now than it used to be before?
Yeah, there's I think there's several steps to do this. I think one of the things that is important is to actually really sit down and know what your values are and what you're looking for, right? Before even going to such spaces. Like you kind of have you know what you're looking for, right? And you want to know yourself and understand yourself and who you are, who you want to become, to know what you are looking for in friends, right? So I think it is important to take that step back and be like, okay, what are my values at this point in my life? What do I want? What do I want to become? And then therefore, what types of friends now, do I want to gravitate towards? Do I feel will be helpful to have as a community and so on? I think that's an important step that because as you said, it's not going to be the same. You're not looking for the same types of friends necessarily that you were looking for when you were a teenager or when you were in college or so on. you're a different person, right? And yeah, so it's important to know what your priorities are, what your values are, and start from there, inshallah.
Yeah. And like I said, it takes self-reflection and
Yeah,
introspection to
exactly.
sort of get there to sort of
Yeah,
figure out what you're looking for.
yeah.
And I think as I've gotten older, it's not selfish. It's
Hmm.
not selfish to sort of be very mindful and pick and choose
Yeah,
how you're spending your time because it
yeah,
is your time and it's your
yeah.
energy. Like, ideally, you're doing it for good. And if the
Uh-huh.
space you're in and the people you're around aren't, meeting those expectations, at some points it is better for you. It is
Yeah.
better for you to remove yourself from that environment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's important to also recognize that you're looking for quality, right? You're not looking for quantity. And I think sometimes when we're teenagers, we're in the school phase, you might be more in the mindset of you're looking for quantity, right? You want to be popular, you want to have that big group of friends, you want to be in the in group, you know, you want to be in that large group. But it's important to recognize, as you're out of those phases, that it's actually the quality that is much more important than the quantity. So instead of looking for, okay, I need, 10 good friends and so on, just be mindful that it's okay to have one or two quality friends, right? They can be much more impactful than having that larger group of friends. So don't be too focused on just the numbers of it, right? Really be focused on the quality of those friends that you are trying to meet and engage with. And as you said, avoid those negative influences, right? And those negative influences, sometimes it's not very obvious. It can be so subtle that you're not even fully recognizing them. So you kind of really need to be not just self-reflecting at the beginning to understand yourself, but really self-reflecting along the way because there can be such subtle influences that you don't even recognize are happening, but they're slowly, 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 slowly like seeping in, and happening. And so, yeah, you need to self-reflect, and it's okay to take a step back. It's okay to reflect and recognize, okay, you can be still kind and nice, of course, you don't need to be rude to anybody, but you can do so in a way where you realize, oh, okay, I need to maybe take a step back from, a certain group or so on. And they're not when I self-reflect, these are not the values that I am looking for. So I recognize them now and I recognize, I need to make some changes, for example, and just
Mm-hmm.
continuously self-reflecting.
Yeah, because that looks different as you sort of change and you get older
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
things happen. So it's super important to kind of be really aware of your lifestyle, of your
Yeah.
values, and what you're looking for as well. Because I like to your point, it's so subtle sometimes,
Yeah.
and you just sort of, and I've noted, you just kind of pick habits, like,
Yeah.
right, like at some point you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, or like at what point you stop doing what you should be doing, and you sort of pick up habits like subtly over time. And like we've talked about this, like at some point, you'd rather prevent than sort of have to remedy like thereafter. Exactly. So you kind of mentioned this component of like looking to yourself, analyzing your own self, and then that can kind of help inform what you're looking for in a space. Do you have any other like practical tips, something that we can all sort of put into our checklist, or kind of how do we navigate these social spaces to meet, those individuals that we want to surround ourselves with?
I think one thing to add is that, to be mindful of the qualities and values that you are looking for, but also try to also find your interests, right? Like, for example, if you're someone that likes going on hikes, right? You might want to, be finding groups where, okay, someone's aligned in your values, but also you have a shared interest too, right? It's not just that those certain values, but then you don't really have any shared interests with that person, so it's hard to even connect and develop a friendship with that person organically because you're not sharing interests, right? So I think it's a bit of both. Like you need to know what your values are, but also try to find those shared interests, if it is fitness, if it is, I don't know, healthy eating, baking, whatever it is that you can actually do an activity together that you're going to enjoy, but you're also going to be able to connect with that person that has values that you also value. inshallah, and also to be patient in that process. It's going to take time, right? You're not going to from day one, day two, you know, be so in tune with that person, and you just be patient with the process, right? It's going to take time to build that connection.
Yeah, yeah. It's I think it's really funny because at different phases of my life, like I forgot the concept of like I was like, oh my God, making friends is such a weird thing.
Yeah.
Like, when you have to when you have these phases in your life where you're sort of starting over and there's just
Yeah.
new chapters naturally, whether that's like after you're done with whatever, I always have this moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to make, friends again, or what
Yeah.
does making friends look like? And
Exactly. Yeah.
it's a process, and you just need to be patient and know that, like, even also there are people that are meant to be in your life for just different parts of
Yeah.
it.
Phases. Yeah.
And that comes with the idea of being, a stranger in this world,
Hmm.
that like you're not so attached to the moment in time, because
Yeah.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of planners, and you just need to be patient and sort of know that you might not understand why now, but it is for the best.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
comes also with people. It's like people can leave your life at different parts, and you can also decide to leave their life. And
Hmm.
at the end of the day, like, you're doing it for, at least, inshallah, for the pleasure of Allah. And if you're
Yeah.
doing that, then it can only really be, good for you
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
as well. So, we talk. I don't know if we've been talking about like physical, presences and spaces and environments. So I'd be curious to kind of just ask, because we're both online. We have a digital presence, and so curious to kind of understand, what does building community look like online? Like, how can we use maybe platforms online to connect with Muslim friends and create those spaces that, given technology, we can these days? But I would love to kind of hear your take on that.
Yeah. It's really interesting because it like initially, if you had asked me before, I would think it's really difficult to connect with someone online. But subhanAllah, there are through like different sisterhood sessions that we've done, different events and things, even though they've been online, there is a connection that has happened with different people that I've been surprised. I'm like, wow, subhanAllah, even though I've never met this person in person, right? But I still feel like I have really connected with this person, subhanAllah. And this has happened with multiple sisters online through our sessions, through different online spaces, and so on. So I feel like you can build those connections. Again, it takes time because you're not you know, it's different than being in person, of course, with that person. It takes time and so on. But subhanAllah, it's beautiful to see that because in some of our sisterhood sessions, for example, some people ask like, oh, who's in this city? I'm in this city and I don't know what and stuff. So people like have started forming connections that were online and taking them offline, basically. And that's also like one option, right? You might be in a space where you're actually attending a space where people have shared values because you're attending because it's a lecture, for example, connected to the Quran or connected to something. So you already know that, okay, we do have something shared there, right? And sometimes you can then take it online to offline. Basically, if there are people, in your same city, and so on. Yeah. So subhanAllah, I didn't expect this before, thinking about it before. But yeah, subhanAllah, somehow somehow there's a lot of these connections that are formed online.
Subhanallah, subhanallah. And obviously you need to be wary, but generally you have to be wary wherever, whether that's even in person, and because you never know. And as long as you sort of start to implement those moments of reflection into your day to day, and you're not losing sight on what is important, then these online spaces that I have also found can be so rewarding, to find a shared community that will help you through challenges and things perhaps you're not getting in a physical environment. So in this last question that I have in this conversation of just community building and its importance in ideally, helping us maintain and strengthen our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, can we just sort of like talk about just the importance, right? And this sort of section before we get into, our own setting healthy boundaries. What does the importance of building deep and meaningful connections within the Muslim community look like, and why is it important? We can even touch upon it in connection to our connection with Allah, but just perhaps this conclusion of this bucket, like why is it even important? Like why are we doing the hard work when it comes to finding friendships and communities? What does that impact look like on our lives?
Yeah, and I think you touched upon it a little bit before when you mentioned this hadith that a person is upon the religion of their best friend, right? So let one of you look at who they befriend, right? And subhanAllah, within this, there's a self-reflection, right? Look at who you befriend, self-reflect on that, and recognize that they do impact you. They do impact you faith-wise, right? So putting in that effort to find somebody that you can really connect with in your values, shares your faith, it really, inshallah, has a positive impact on you because it's a reminder of who you are, who you want to be, what you want to be like. It's much harder to have those friendships without those shared values, right? Because again, it can be subtle at first, right? You might think that, okay, I'm strong enough, I'm Muslim, I'm still going to pray 5 times a day, everyone's going to be understanding, I'm going to have, you know, be very firm with what my requirements are or what my needs are, and so on. But then you you don't know, maybe over time, subtly, you're like, let me just give it 10 more minutes, this prayer, Okay, let me just hang out with these people, a little bit more. And then it becomes 20 minutes. And then slowly it's just like the time shifts. And you start to have subtle changes that you didn't necessarily intend to have. And you thought that you were strong enough to not let it happen. But it does end up slowly impacting you, right? Whereas when you have somebody that shares that faith value, the other person is reminding you, for example, hey, it's prayer time, you know, um, let's go pray, and so on. And you're doing it together, and you're spending time with that friend, you're still doing that thing together. It's much easier to keep it a habit, right? When you're doing it together with that person. And this doesn't, and it's not to say that, subhanAllah, I've had non-Muslim friends that have told me, hey, did you pray yet? Like they've asked because they're so used to knowing, And subhanAllah, and that's a beautiful thing too. It's not to put down anybody or not to put down any friends, right? You can find good friends in different spaces, but it's important to just be mindful that it's much easier to keep those habits that you want to be
Mm-hmm.
building when somebody shares those habits
Mm-hmm.
with you, right?
Yeah,
So yeah. So
absolutely.
yeah.
Oh, that's a great way to sort of like summarize this component of it's important, it has an impact on your life, and you just need to be very mindful as to who you're befriending,
Yeah.
because it will make a difference in your
Yeah.
day to day. It'll make a difference, and it's so I think about, um, and this is I just sometimes think about like, will this person ask for me on the day of judgment?
Yeah.
If they're higher up, inshallah, and like they're in Jannat al-Firdaus, and like they're going, because you hear about the idea that like Allah Ta'ala will grant the person in a level of Jannah whoever they're asking for. And so I
Mhm.
think about like, is my friend, like, is she going to ask Allah, like, where is Aisha? And
Yeah.
I don't know. I sometimes reflect on that, and I'm like, subhanallah, like, how can I try my best to surround myself with the best so I can be inspired to be my best self, as well. This last sort of bucket of the conversation that I have today is, so we talked about remedying disconnection, and then how does community kind of impact that? What does friendship look like? Kind of like all of that to say is like, at the end of the day, we should also have healthy boundaries. Setting them. What does setting those healthy boundaries look like? Because it's also, I think people overlook the fact that there is this idea of setting boundaries in our religion, in our deen, like within the context of Islam. Like, it is often sort of emphasized, etiquette, social mannerisms, boundaries for yourself, but also not crossing other people's boundaries, right? You have rights upon, people have rights upon you, and you need to be mindful of that. So kind of just like from the beginning, like what is this concept of boundaries that we're perhaps referencing in the context of Islam, and why is it important to kind of talk about?
Yeah, I really love this topic because it's super important, and I personally sometimes fall into this trap of letting boundaries slip, you know? And it's kind of a balance because subhanAllah, sometimes we fall into this space where we feel in order to be a good person, I need to always be there for people. I need to always be attentive to people. I need to always be helping others. I need to always be present, and so on and so on. And so I can't say no. Someone needs something, I have to step up and be there, right? But what ends up happening is we are trampling over our own boundaries, right? And this is something I personally am always trying to correct, because it's it's not about just being a good person. You have to always be there at your own expense, right? The expense of your own time, your own energy, your own sleep, and all of that. Like you have to be able to recognize boundaries, and Islam talks about boundaries, right? The importance of boundaries, subhanallah. And we see it in multiple places, right? We see it in the Quran about knocking on someone's door, right? Having permission to enter someone's house, right? You don't want to just be there and just show up and barge into someone's home, right? That's a boundary. Even people were advised how to spend time at the Prophet ﷺ's home, right? Not to overstay their visit, right? If they're coming for a meal, okay, and they have their permission, okay, go there, but don't sit too long because it hurts the Prophet ﷺ, and he feels shy to tell you. Like we literally have this, in the Quran, and like he feels shy to tell you, but Allah is not shy to tell you the truth, subhanallah. And that's the thing sometimes that it's you don't want to be mean to the person, right? You don't want to tell someone, hey, it's time for you to leave. Like, hello, it's been a while, you've been at my house for a while. You don't want to do that, right? Because you want to be nice, subhanallah. And we see it with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he was shy to tell people to, hey, like, I need my space, kind of. It's been a while, right? But we see it addressed in the Quran, and I think it's so beautiful that it's addressed in the Quran because it is a reminder for all of us, right? And it's a reminder for both. I feel like the person visiting and the host, right? You both need to be mindful of each other's boundaries. The person visiting shouldn't just be, should be mindful of their time, when they're coming, the permission that they have to come, and so on. And the host even should also be mindful of that person's time, right? If a host is inviting someone for dinner and says come at 5 p.m., but they don't serve dinner till 10 p.m., and that person is forced to be there 5 hours plus the 2 hour dinner, it's a 7 hour day, and maybe they really wanted just to be there for 2, 3 hours, right? And you've also crossed a boundary, right? It goes both ways, and yeah, subhanAllah, I feel like there's so many beautiful lessons in Islam that teaches us about boundaries. And yeah, I think it's an important thing that we need to learn and be mindful about, inshallah, to have those healthy relationships with others, inshallah, and lasting relationships with others, right? Because if you keep crossing someone's boundaries,
Yeah.
they're not going to want to be spending time with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the fact that you kind of touch upon this idea that it does go both ways.
Mhm.
That you need to be mindful of other people's boundaries and make sure you're not crossing them, but you should have a sort of sense of what your own boundaries are.
Mhm.
Because to your original, discussion here, it's you should never, at some point you don't want to wear yourself out. Like you don't
Yeah.
want to get too thin, or you don't want to spread yourself out too thin where you're
Yeah.
neglecting your own needs, especially when it comes at the expense of your spiritual needs, your
Yeah.
religious needs,
Yeah.
right? Where you are really you are volunteer, you're doing so many things,
Yeah.
and then I've heard stories where people come home for the night and they'll be like, did I even do X, Y, and Z? And whatever
Yeah.
those goals are for yourself, oftentimes I hear it in the context of their religious deen goals about reading a certain amount or memorizing, or if you get too busy, I don't know, it's subhanallah, like when the idea of busyness is in relation to helping others out or doing things for other people. I don't know why the first to go in our day to day sometimes is our deen goals, like
Mhm.
our it's not the fact that we won't eat lunch or like,
Yeah.
you're going to make time for food, right?
Yeah.
Or you're going to make time for other things.
Yeah.
But sometimes when we do we're kind of spreading ourselves, it takes a hit in our
Hmm.
Deen. Like, what are we doing in the day of like, okay, maybe I don't have time to read this book that I was planning to read
Hmm.
every day, like 5 pages of this,
Yeah.
or in like, let me not do my 10 pages for the day, let me read Quran for. I just think sometimes it's like we make time, but sometimes it's at the expense of
Yes,
other things.
exactly. Yeah.
um
And I
and so
heard
a
this.
question, I mean,
Yeah.
oh yeah, go for it. I was gonna say,
I was gonna say, I heard this thing that I heard someone say, like, a quote that just because I'm free doesn't mean I'm available, you know? And I was like, that's so true. Like, sometimes we take our free time, which is our time, you know, which we need. Like, you need that solo time, you need that time to rejuvenate, you need that time for your own goals that you have. But then we look at it, okay, the calendar's free in this time. I have this 2 hour block. Okay, I'm therefore available. Let me say yes to this thing, and we've lost our free time, you know? And yeah, so I thought that was an interesting to think about it. Yeah, just because I have free time, doesn't mean I'm available to put something in it, right? And it's important to have that time for ourselves, as you said. Yeah.
yeah. I would love to hear it from you. Like, how can we, as individuals, like as Muslims, like how do we implement this idea of setting those boundaries and maybe not crossing them? And this kind of touches on this other question. So if you want to answer them together, like how do we find that balance of you're of being hospitable, like saying yes to people, to show for showing up, right? But also respecting our own, and that is,
Hmm.
it's you should respect your own boundaries as
Yeah.
well, your personal needs and things. How do we kind of balance that? How do we implement some of the teachings that our Deen has outlined for us?
Yeah, I think that there's several things I think that we can do. One is, we should be mindful if we are, for example, especially when we're going to someone's house, right? If you're going out with someone to a place, it's usually easier to kind of confine the time, right? But when you're going to someone's home and you need to be the one that says, okay, it's time for me to go and stuff, I think that one of the things is before going to the person's home, you should have in mind what time you want to be out by, right? So that you can initiate that and be ready to initiate that out, right? I also think that you can kind of clear this up by communicating beforehand, like telling someone, yeah, I'm free, I can come over for a couple of hours. You've set the expectation that you will be there just for a couple of hours, right? So whatever they have planned, they also know, okay, she's gonna be over for a couple of hours, right? I'm not gonna feed her dinner 5 hours later, for example, right? You both kind of have set that expectation. And even the host inviting someone, like maybe you can say, it's the same thing, some sort of language that adds a piece of info so you're both on the same page, right? Where you're saying, like, hey, do you have a couple of hours free to come over for dinner on Sunday, for example? Maybe around 5. You've kind of set that expectation that, okay, I'm kind of expecting this to be a 2 hour thing, 2 to 3 hour thing. And I think those are some like subtle ways that we can kind of clarify, with someone those boundaries and those expectations. And I also think if this is, for example, your first few times meeting someone outside, like say you've attended a halaqa, you've met someone and you want to get to know them, but you want to keep it limited, right? You want to keep it to a 30-minute, 45-minute thing, then you make the choice to, okay, let's go grab a coffee, right? You know that it's a short thing. Let's go grab a tea, right? Not let's come over for dinner and it's a 3 hour thing when really you wanted to set a first step connection and you wanted it to just be 30, 45 minutes to give you a sense, right, of the person and so on. So I think it's just having those different ways of doing things and also being a bit more clear in how we communicate as well, I think helps set that expectation, inshallah. And I know it's not easy and it also depends culturally, right? Because, for example, like, okay, in the Arab culture, for example, you wouldn't tell somebody come to my house from 5 to 7. It's weird to hear that. Like, okay, you're telling me I need to leave by 7. And so for me, when I moved to the US, for example, I was not used to this thing where people would say, do you want to have lunch between 12 to 1? I was like, wow, they're giving me like an end time. Like it was such a foreign concept to me because I didn't grow up like that. I grew up that you invite someone for lunch, there's no kind of ending, there's no set time that you're going to finish, you know? So I think I mean, you have to also be mindful, of course, that you're not hurting the other person by what you're saying, right? So you deal with it differently. That's why sometimes subtle ways can help in those situations where you just say, "Hey, do you have a couple of hours free, to have dinner together?" And you've said that, but you've not also told the person, "Hey, you need to be out by 7," kind of thing. It's kind of a little more subtle, but you both have that
Mm.
expectation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That makes so much sense. You think does come down to communication,
Mhm. Yeah.
and really showing up for yourself as well in those conversations, and not just sort of like lightly allowing yourself to be walked on, or like you need to know
Hmm.
yourself. You really do
Yeah.
need to know yourself, and I think a theme here today in several different categories that we talked about is knowing yourself and doing the learning about yourself to understand your needs, your boundaries,
Mhm.
and what you're looking for. So to kind of end our conversation here today, subhanallah, I don't know how the time
Yeah.
has flown by, but can you maybe walk us through, share some advice on what does that communication look like? How do you enforce your own boundaries politely? Like, how do you do that effectively? Really, how do you do that effectively so that, because we know that setting boundaries can contribute to healthier relationships,
Mhm.
whether it's family, social, professional. I mean, setting boundaries is so important and across several different spaces. So how do we go about that effectively?
One thing that is helpful is to have set things that you know already are ways out of something, and also knowing how to communicate beforehand. Like if somebody invites you, even if it's just coffee, right? They want to go out for coffee. I mean, you can say something like, yeah, I'm available from 2 to 3. You've set that expectation. That was your boundary. You want to be out by 3. You've set it, but you're letting the person know that's my available slot, right? You're not saying I want to be out by 3, you're being polite about it. Like, yeah, I'm available from 2 to 3, so I can meet you then if that works, for example, right? And also respecting when someone else also has a boundary request, right? Again, it goes both ways, and I think that it's also, you know what? I just remembered because this actually happened with you today because I needed 10 more minutes, right? To like be ready. I was not ready initially. So I think that's a good example actually. So um so I wasn't ready. I was still trying to prep set things up, right? And I was like, "Hey, do you mind if I take 10 more minutes?" Right? Because I was like, either I show up and I'm not like ready and my thoughts are not together because I haven't had a moment to kind of get organized, right? Or I take 10 minutes, I request 10 minutes, and I take those 10 minutes to kind of get better organized, right? And I think, and this is an example that goes both ways, right? I made the request, right, to you. Like, do you mind if I take 10 more minutes? You had a beautiful response because you said, let me know when you're ready, So it left it open, right? If I needed less time, I could have told you, hey, actually, I'm ready now, right? If I needed more time, you left that door open for me. And I thought that was a beautiful way to respond, right? And you kind of have put the person at ease, right? The other person comfortable that it's fine and just let me know when you're ready, right? I think this is an example that
Ah,
I'll go with because
yeah,
it literally happened today, I
literally
think like
just happened.
yeah, it just happened. Yeah, and I think we both communicated. It was nice, it
Hmm.
was respectful, and
Hmm.
it's like that was it. That was the
Hmm.
boundary, right? That
Hmm.
that was kind of set. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's my
yeah,
example. I'll end with
I
that
love it.
example.
No, and I
Yeah.
think it's because, like, to your point, it goes both ways, and it comes with
Yeah.
communication on either side.
Yeah.
Like, you need to vouch for yourself, right?
Yeah.
You're doing like disservice to yourself if you're not advocating for yourself,
Yeah.
if requesting. So I just need a second to myself,
Yeah.
and then it would be like wrong for me as well to not accommodate, to not
Yeah.
be so sort of lenient when it comes to other people's needs and things. So that's beautifully sort of summarized as to what does that two-way communication look like and those
Yeah.
expectations. But at the end of the day, being able to still advocate for yourself, in a sort of politeful like
Yeah.
manner as well.
Yeah.
Subhanallah. So I don't know. This is the end to our conversation officially. Concluding thoughts here. We talked a lot about different components in terms of just navigating faith, friendship, and boundaries, and how does that all come together to ideally, strengthen our relationship with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala? Because at the end of the day, this podcast is for those moments to kind of strengthen and kind of talk about all things Allah, right? Like, how do we? The title is Geeking Over God, and so we kind of talk about these different components to please Allah. So today's last question, I asked you this last time, and I don't know, subhanAllah, I don't remember, but we'll see kind of like what is, a lesson learned that you understand now that you wish you could have told your younger
Yeah.
self.
I think last time I talked about prayers, but I think this time I will connect it to this topic so that it's something different. But I think one thing that I would tell myself is that it really doesn't matter if you miss out on a specific gathering. I think growing up as teenagers, that age, you're in school, you and I'm generalizing, but I think a lot of us go through this where we feel like we don't want to miss out on that gathering that everyone is going to. It's the end of the world. If we miss out, it feels like the biggest deal on earth. Or I can't believe my parents said no, I can't go. Like, what on earth? And it's such a big deal to you, right? But when I look back, I'm like, I don't remember any of the gatherings that I missed out on you know it really wasn't a big deal. And those people who are friends with you for you, they will carry through with you whether you came to that specific gathering or not. It really doesn't matter if you missed out on that thing. It really isn't a big deal. So that's one thing that I would connect to tell my younger self now based on this topic
Hmm.
about relationships and friends,
Yeah,
that it's fine if you miss out on a
I
gathering.
know.
It's really not a big deal.
Absolutely. The faster that I, back in the day got over FOMO, right? The fear
Yeah,
of missing out,
yeah,
I think the more happier I became
yeah,
because it wasn't, because sometimes I would go to these environments and be like, did I actually enjoy that? Did I
yeah,
actually have to be here, right? Like
yeah,
for what?
yeah.
It didn't need to happen. Well, subhanallah, thank you so much again for joining us. This conversation was super impactful for me, and I loved kind of talking through these points. Thank you again for
Thank you
joining
for
us.
hosting.
Long
Thank you
awaited. I
so much.
really, really
Yeah.
appreciate you being here.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Of course. Well, ladies, you heard it here. A second episode, a long awaited second episode of Geeking Over God. Inshallah, I'll catch you next time in different episodes. Feel free to turn on your post notifications, subscribe, connect with Ghena, and stay tuned for a next episode, inshallah, hopefully sooner than later, about Geeking Over God. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.